And good morning again. We begin this morning in Afghanistan, where Senator Barack Obama is on the ground. Lara Logan, our chief foreign affairs correspondent, sat down with him for a long interview this morning. We're going first to her. Lara.
Good morning, Bob. Well, Senator Obama spent his first day in Afghanistan yesterday visiting the troops, talking to soldiers, speaking with their commanders. Today he met privately with President Hamid Karzai of Afghanistan, and he says that after talking to both sides, his assessment is that the situation in Afghanistan is both precarious and urgent. And he said that the U.S. has to start planning to put more troops in Afghanistan now.
I believe U.S. Troop levels need to increase, and for at least a year now, I've called for 2 additional brigades, perhaps 3. I think it's very important that we unify command more effectively to coordinate our military activities. But military alone is not going to be enough. The Afghan government needs to do more, but we have to understand that the situation is precarious and urgent here in Afghanistan, and I believe this has to be our central focus, the central front on our battle against terror.
In what circumstances would you authorize unilateral U.S. action against targets inside the tribal areas?
Well, what I've said is that if we had actionable intelligence against high-value al-Qaeda targets and the Pakistani government was unwilling to go after those targets, that we should.
Would you consider unilateral U.S. action?
I will push Pakistan very hard to make sure that we go after those training camps. I think it's absolutely vital to the security interests of both the United States and Pakistan.
Secretary Robert Gates said that they are looking at options to get additional U.S. forces to Afghanistan, quote, sooner rather than later.
While Afghanistan has minimal oil resources, to the north the former Soviet republics of Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan possess substantial oil and natural gas, which Russia exploited before the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1990.
Already we have American bases and troops in Uzbekistan, in Tajikistan, in Kyrgyzstan, and the Russians clearly are very nervous about this. China is another big player. China would like to extract a lot of this oil and gas and perhaps try and ship it to China. So I think, in the future, we may well see a kind of three-way competition between Russia, China, and the United States for the resources of Central Asia.
U.S. military bases may now have replaced Soviet bases throughout Central Asia, but for American oil companies a problem remains. Where to run pipelines without passing through the territory of competing powers. With Russia to the north, Azerbaijan across the Caspian Sea to the west, Iran to the southwest, India to the southeast, and China to the east, apparently running pipelines through Afghanistan and Pakistan to the Indian Ocean seems to be the answer. Such a project was actually conceived of by the California-based Unocal Oil Company in the early 1990s.
We've had them in Kuwait for a while. We have permanent bases in Afghanistan. We are building permanent bases in Uzbekistan. We actually have 4 bases in Georgia. So if you draw a map that connects the dots between all of the bases that we have done since the Cold War ended, what you see is American military hegemony covering 90% of the globe's energy resources in terms of gas and in terms of oil.
In May of 2002, trusting that the U.S. military would bring peace for Afghanistan, President Karzai signs a treaty with the leaders of Pakistan and Turkmenistan for the construction of a $2 billion pipeline from Turkmenistan to the Indian Ocean. Turkmenistan and Afghanistan hope to generate much-needed income for their economies. Pakistan hopes to secure an oil route for itself. Its position would also allow Pakistan to control at least part of the oil supply to India.
The United States began bombing Afghanistan just 4 weeks after 9/11. Mr. Bush said he was doing so because the Taliban government of Afghanistan had been harboring bin Laden.
We will smoke him out of their holes.
We're going to smoke him out.
Smoke him out. We'll smoke him out of his cave.
Let's rush him and smoke him out.
For all his tough talk, Bush really didn't do much.
But what they did was slow and small. They put only 11,000 troops into Afghanistan. There are more police here in Manhattan, than there are U.S. troops in Afghanistan. Basically, the president botched the response to 9/11. He should have gone right after bin Laden. The U.S. Special Forces didn't get into the area where bin Laden was for 2 months.
In 1997, while George W. Bush was governor of Texas, a delegation of Taliban leaders from Afghanistan flew to Houston to meet with UNICAL executives to discuss the building of a pipeline through Afghanistan, bringing natural gas from the Caspian Sea. And who got a Caspian Sea drilling contract the same day UNICAL signed the pipeline deal? A company headed by a man named Dick Cheney, Halliburton.
From the point of view of the U.S. government, this was kind of a magic pipeline because it could serve so many purposes.
And who else stood to benefit from the pipeline? Bush's #1 campaign contributor, Kenneth Lay, and the good people of Enron. Only the British press covered this trip. Then, in 2001, just 5.5 months before 9/11, the Bush administration welcomed a special Taliban envoy to tour the United States to help improve the image of the Taliban government.
You have imprisoned the women. It's a horror, let me tell you.
And I'm really sorry to your husband. He might have a very difficult time with you.
Here's the Taliban official visiting our State Department to meet with U.S. officials. Why on earth would the Bush administration allow a Taliban leader to visit the United States, knowing that the Taliban were harboring the man who bombed the USS Cole and our African embassies?
And he also had dealings with Omar Sheikh, the man who murdered Osama bin Laden.
We cannot wait for the final proof.
He also had dealings with Omar Sheikh, the man who murdered Osama bin Laden.
The smoking gun.
He also had dealings with Omar Sheikh, the man who murdered Osama bin Laden.
It could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Murdered Osama bin Laden.
The smoking gun. We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun. It could come in the form of a mushroom cloud. Fabio.
Mr. President, in your speeches now, you rarely talk or mention Osama bin Laden. Why is that? Also, can you tell the American people if any more information, if you know if he is dead or alive?
Yeah.
Deep in your heart, don't you truly believe that until you find out if he is dead or alive, you won't really eliminate the threat of it?
Well, deep in my heart, I know the man's on the run if he's alive at all. And who knows if he's hiding in some cave or not. We hadn't heard from him in a long time. He's a person who's now been marginalized. He's the ultimate parasite who found weakness, exploited it, and met his match. So I don't know where he is. Nor do, I just don't spend that much time on him. I'll be honest with you.